Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to AlphaBiolabs' latest webinar entitled Discover the Latest in Alcohol Testing for the Legal Sector. By way of introduction, my name is Andrew Priestley. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager for the legal sector here at AlphaBiolabs, and I'll be facilitating the webinar for you this morning. I'm delighted to be joined by my two colleagues. We've got Ashley Hodgkinson, who's our Sample Collections Manager, and also Marie Davis, who's our Toxicology Reporting Manager. In terms of the agenda, we will keep the webinar to within the 45 minutes. I'll open the webinar just with a brief sort of introduction, talking about the latest trends in alcohol usage in the UK. I'll then pass over to Ashley, who will talk about how we collect and test different sample types. And then Marie will talk to you about how to interpret our court-approved alcohol test reports. We then will conclude with our usual Q&A session. So please do use the Q&A function on your Zoom technology to ask any questions that you have throughout the session. We will then do our best to answer all of those questions before we finish at about 12:15. There's also a short post-webinar survey. So before you log off today, if you could kindly complete that, it will only take you a minute, and it gives us really useful feedback for the future planning of these webinars. Okay, so just to set the scene really, I've just done a bit of research looking at the latest trends in alcohol usage in the UK. And I just thought I'd start really by just defining again what we mean by excessive consumption of alcohol. So based on guidance from the World Health Organization, if a person consumes more than 60 grams of alcohol, which is about 7.5 units on an average daily basis over several months, this is deemed to be chronic and excessive consumption. And I think the key message there is the word average. So it's an average daily basis. If that average is in excess of 7.5 units over several months, then it would be deemed that that person has chronic and excessive consumption of alcohol. So alcohol, as you probably know, is measured in units, and 1 unit roughly is equal to 8 grams of alcohol. The amount of units in each drink is based on the ABV, or the alcohol by volume, and the measurement, example, a pint or a bottle. So again, just to stress, 7.5 units or more on average per day over a period of months is deemed chronic and excessive. How does that translate into the drinks that people may have? Well, again, I've just put some examples on the screen there for you. So, for example, for a standard glass of red wine, that's the equivalent of 2.3 units. A full bottle of red wine would be around about 9 units. A pint of beer will be 2.3 units. A pint of cider, 2.6 units. So again, you can see how very quickly 3 or 4 drinks per day, you're starting to get to that level where it would be deemed as chronic and excessive over a few months. So I spent a bit of time just looking at a couple of recent surveys. So this is from the statistics from Health Survey for England 2022, and we can see summarised there. So 2 out of 10 adults throughout that year had not drunk alcohol at all. However, nearly 6 out of 10 adults drank at levels that put them at a lower risk of alcohol-related harm. What we mean by that is anything up to 14 units per week, which equates obviously to 2 units per day. But then 2 out of 10 adults drank at an increasing or higher risk of alcohol-related harm. So that's more than 14 units per week or 2 units per day. And these charts, as part of this report, this one just shows the prevalence of drinking over 14 units a week by income and sex. You can quite clearly see that for the highest income bracket, it tends to have the highest number of either men or women drinking over 14 units a week. And that tends to just drop slightly as we go down through the income classes. This graph is an interesting one. So this just looks at men by age. So the overall bar chart shows the prevalence of drinking over 14 units per week. And again, we can see that for the 55 to 64 years category and 65 to 74, they had the highest percentage of people in the survey who were in that bracket of over 14 units per week. However, what's even more interesting, I would say, is if you look at the grey parts of each bar, that tells you the percentage of people in that age range who actually are at higher risk because they drink more than 50 units per week, which would really put them up at that level that we defined before of chronic and excessive consumption. And when we look at the age groups for that, the 16 to 24 year age group and the 55 to 64 had the highest percentage of people in that category who fall into that real higher risk banding. This slide shows the previous graph, but it's for women by age. And again, I think the message here is that for the increased risk, more than 14 units per week, and also for the higher risk, more than 35 units in the case of women, then the two highest risk categories for age is 45 to 54 and 55 to 64 years of age. I then also looked at another survey called Statistics on Alcohol Toolkit Study of 2022. This survey was approximately 2,000 people aged 16 years and over. And what I wanted to demonstrate here really was the impact that COVID has had on alcohol consumption in the UK. So this particular graph shows the prevalence of increasing and higher risk drinking for those people in the survey. And again, probably higher risk defined as 14 units or more per week. There's three lines on the graph, as you can see. If we just focus on the red line, that's for everybody in the survey. We can quite clearly see from April 2020, which is around about the time that the pandemic started, there was a significant increase in terms of the level of higher risk drinking of people in the survey. And whilst it dropped off steadily throughout the end of 2020 to 21, it's still, as you can see now, even coming all the way up to February of this year, it's still at a significant level higher than it was pre-COVID. And this is backed up in the same survey by the people in that higher risk category having been told by their GP to cut down on their consumption. Again, we can see around about the time that COVID kicked in, April 2020, there's quite a significant increase there over the next 6 months. It has fluctuated quite a bit, and there was a bit of a dip at the end of 2021, but as we're now well into 2023, we can see that generally there's a higher percentage of people being told by their GPs that they need to cut down on their drinking. And finally, this backed it up again, the people in the survey, we can see here that there's an increasing number in the survey who have also admitted to themselves that they need to think about cutting down on their alcohol consumption, or indeed stopping altogether. So I would say in conclusion that the COVID pandemic has had a real detrimental effect on the levels of alcohol consumption in the UK. Okay, so hopefully you found that a useful introduction. I'm now going to hand over to Ashley, and she's going to talk to you about how we collect and test for different sample types in alcohol testing. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you. So we're just going to start off by looking at probably our most common type of alcohol testing, which would be using a sample of head hair. And then we're going to have a quick look at some alternatives, and then finally how you decide what would be the most suitable test for your client. So when we're doing a head hair alcohol test, we're looking at two markers. So we're looking at ETG and ETPA, which was formerly known as FAEE. The levels that we're looking for are to advise whether someone has drank to excess, so that chronic and excessive level that Andrew referred to earlier. And we're looking back up to 6 months in head hair. So that's something we really want to think about before we instruct any type of test, is how far back we need to know. So if you need to go further than 6 months, what are the alternative samples? And if you're wanting to look for less than 6 months, is head hair the best method? Or again, do we want to look at an alternative? So the incorporation of the marker into the hair is done through the bloodstream. And as the hair grows, the biomarker is incorporated into it and grows along the hair. And this is how we apply the time frame of the 6 months. This process takes around 10 days to do. So you will notice if you've used us before for hair strand testing, for head hair testing, there is a gap of roughly 2 weeks between the sample collection process and the start of the reporting. And the reason for those 2 weeks is to allow that growth so that we can be sure that the time frame's as accurate as possible. And then we work backwards from there. So applying a time frame to head hair for alcohol is done similarly to the way in which we do it for drugs. So we know that hair grows at approximately 1 centimetre per month. And therefore, if we have 3 centimetres of head hair, we can look back 3 months. And if we have 6 centimetres of head hair, we can look back 6 months. This again is something you really want to consider before you instruct any type of testing as to whether your client has sufficient head hair to provide a sample to us. So if, for instance, you have someone who has, say, 1 centimetre of head hair, you wouldn't want to instruct them for this type of test because we're not going to be able to collect enough of a sample to provide that time frame. The minimum hair that we require for head alcohol testing is 3 centimetres. And then, like we say, we can go back up to 6 months, which would require 6 centimetres of head hair. If your client has more than 6 centimetres of head hair, that's fine, but that would be as far back as we would be able to report regardless of the length of it. So it's something to consider before instructing us on this type of test. A few things you need to consider before you decide whether this type of testing is suitable for you. So it would be that we're reporting on chronic and excessive consumption for up to those 6 months. So like we said, is there a sufficient sample, and is that exactly what you're looking for, that longer time frame rather than a shorter window? It's not possible for us to use this test to determine the purity of the alcohol that was consumed, how frequently it was consumed, or pinpoint specific days or times in which the alcohol was consumed. So it will be a report as an overview, which Marie will speak to you about shortly. But it can't say, for example, that during the month of April, this particular person drank on the 12th and then again on the 15th. It cannot be that specific. It would be either for 3 or 6 months as a whole. So if you are looking for that more precise information, then this type of test is not the one for you, and you would look at alternative methods. Excessive use of certain cosmetic treatments on the hair can affect the results. And again, this is something Marie will cover for you, and the information in relation to any cosmetic treatments used by your client you can find in your statement of witness report once the testing has concluded. So we've just spoken about how much head hair is required for this type of test. So it's a minimum of 3 centimetres. Anything less than that, and unfortunately this wouldn't be the correct test for your client, as we wouldn't be able to provide the time frame. So what are the other alternative methods if your donor doesn't have a suitable sample to take? We can use body hair for this type of test. So we can use hair from the forearm, the chest, the back, the beard, but it would only be reporting on ETG. We can't test for ETPA in body hair. There are only 2 sample types of body hair that we can't use, and that would be samples from the pubic area or underarm hair, just due to contamination that can occur. So any other sample is fine, but no pubic hair and no underarm hair. If you are going to proceed with body hair testing for alcohol for ETG, then we would always recommend that it's accompanied by blood testing where possible, just so you get that full picture and you're considering a few alcohol markers rather than just ETG alone. If your donor doesn't have sufficient head hair or body hair, then there is an alternative method we can provide, which would be a sample of nails, again, only testing for ETG. This type of sample goes back up to 12 months as an overview, which is the same time frame that you would get for a body hair sample. So they work similarly in that way. If your client can only provide fingernails, then we would look back up to 6 months. And if they can provide toenails, we can look back up to 12 months. So depending on where the nails come from, dictates the time frame that we can apply to the testing. It is a useful method if there isn't sufficient head hair or body hair, and again we would recommend that it's accompanied by those blood testing. And the nails that we do collect must be clear from any treatments. So no nail varnish, no gel, no acrylics. We're not able to collect a sample with any of those things on the nails. So we just mentioned that if you are going to do body hair or nail testing, you should always accompany it with a blood sample where possible. And there are 4 different types of tests to choose from, which we'll briefly run through now, because depending on your client, depends on which one you would be looking to test. So the first one, the one that we would always recommend, the most precise marker, because it is a direct biomarker of alcohol, would be the PEth test. It's 1 sample of blood, as you can see in the picture there, looks exactly like that. And it can detect chronic drinking and also singing drinking episodes and give an indication of abstinence as well. It's a very good test if you're looking for patterns and trends in alcohol consumption. So unlike head hair testing, where you're looking at an overview of up to 6 months, blood testing covers approximately 4 weeks. So repeat PEth testing over a period of time would give a good indication as to someone's drinking patterns, where you're not necessarily going to get that with a head hair test or a body hair or nails, because they're covering a much larger time frame. If you were going to refer someone for alcohol testing, then this would be the most precise test that you could do in blood. So we'd always recommend PEth as your #1 option for blood testing for alcohol. The other types of tests we can offer are CDT tests. So a carbohydrate deficient transferrin test. This is looking at a marker that is present or elevated when someone consumes alcohol. You wouldn't expect to see a result from this for single binge drinking episodes, so you would again be looking at PEth for that type of thing. But if you're looking for an indication of chronic use over a period of time, then a CDT test might be the preferred method for your client. We can also offer a liver function test. So this is looking for any liver damage based on 3 markers. Again, it can be affected by other things, certain medications. So if you are going to do an LFT test, we would always recommend you accompany it with another one. Again, ideally PEth testing, and liver function testing looks back up to 4 weeks as well. The final one of the 4 blood tests that we offer is an MCV test. So this is looking at the size of the red blood cells. Elevated MCV is common in alcoholics, people that drink excessively. So it can again be a good indication of excessive drinking, but we'd always recommend that you do this test alongside others so that you're getting that full picture, just in case the MCV is affected by anything else, such as medication. So a few points to consider if you are looking to instruct blood alcohol testing. Again, we would always recommend that you do this alongside your body hair or your nail testing, if that's the option you've gone for, because this test is looking back up to 4 weeks. So you're not getting those 3 or 6 month time frames that you would do with a head hair sample, or even 12 months with body hair or nails. CDT, LFT and MCV cannot be conducted on anyone who is pregnant at the time of the sample collection, or for up to 8 weeks after someone has given birth. So it is something to consider if your client is pregnant at the time that you're instructing the testing. However, in those circumstances, we would always take a PEth sample instead, because PEth can be done during pregnancy and after birth. This is just a table to summarise all the tests that we've just gone through, just so you can see the comparison as to which one you would use depending on what you're looking for. So like we said, window of detection is something to really consider. Are you looking to look back historically at someone's use, or are you wanting to look back more specifically at recent use? Are you wanting to detect any patterns in someone's drinking? Would repeat PEth testing be the better option rather than an overview of head hair? Or are you wanting to look back at what someone's been consuming over the past sort of 6 months? And then in that case, head hair would be the better option for you. Head hair cannot be segmented, so it is as an overview. It can't be broken down month by month. And like we say, the tests are looking for chronic and excessive consumption of alcohol, with the exception of the PEth testing, which can be more specific. So which test do we want to choose? There's 4 things that we would always ask that you consider before you instruct us. And you can always give us a call and we can talk you through your options, depends upon what you're looking to ascertain from the results. But firstly, it's why the test is being done, what you're looking to find out, what information you want from the testing. The detection window that you want to cover. So again, that will influence the type of sample. whether your client has a sufficient sample. So if you know, for example, your client is bald or they have no body hair, that can rule out some of the tests immediately, and then you can base your decision around that. And then how is the test going to be funded? And obviously we can provide quotations up front so that you can consider whether the methods that you've chosen are the best ones to go forward with. So a little bit about the sample collection before I hand over to my colleague Marie. We do offer a UK-wide collection service, and we can offer collections in many different places. So from the client's home, your offices, and we can go to prisons if that's the case. We can meet you at the courthouse. We can go to contact centres, as long as there's a suitable place for us to take the sample. So for example, a private room where we can ask the client the questions we need to confidentially. We don't offer sample collections outside. It must be indoors in a private space. And obviously cars as well are not a suitable place for collections. But if you don't feel that there's anywhere that you can provide a setting where that can be done, we have some walk-in clinics based up and down the UK. We have 13 where we offer free sample collections, and we can have that room where your client can attend and provide the sample. The collection process, we need to be completely transparent about this up front because we are taking a sample from someone. It is approximately 200 strands of head hair that we would need to take per sample. And for an alcohol test, we would need 2 samples. It's about the width of a pencil when it's all gathered together. However, it will leave a bald patch as it has to be cut directly from the scalp. When we spoke earlier about the alcohol being consumed and going into the bloodstream and then that growing out through the hair, the root end is the most recent growth period, so it's that we need to collect. We can't cut from the end of a hair sample. It needs to be directly from the root, and therefore there will be a small bald patch left. For head hair samples, it needs to be at least 3 centimetres, and as I said, it's 2 samples for an alcohol test, so it would be 2 individual samples, 2 bald patches, which we will try and be discreet as possible, but we do have to make your client aware of up front. Of course, we maintain a chain of custody with any sample that we collect, and we do this by taking a photograph of your client when they attend the appointment so we can prove who attended at the time. We also ask that they provide identification, ideally photographic where possible, and then the sample is taken away by the sample collector. It's not left in the client's possession at any point, and it's sent directly to the laboratory for testing. It's sealed up, everyone signs to confirm that the sample was taken, and then it's tracked all the way to the laboratory and through the process so that we can be sure that the sample was taken from the person who presented as your client at the time of the appointment. So I'm going to hand over to Marie now, who will talk you through how to interpret the court-approved reports.
Good morning, my name's Marie Davis and I'm the Toxicology Reporting Manager at AlphaBiolabs. What I'm going to go through today is a number of slides which will demonstrate to you how to work your way through the report and find the information you're looking for, which we use to guide our interpretation of the results in the case. So after a sample is received at the laboratory, it goes through a number of steps. It will be segmented into the testing requirement window. It will be decontaminated, extracted and purified, and then it goes through the confirmatory analysis where we detect the alcohol markers in hair, which in this case are ethyl glucuronide and ethyl palmitate. And then when we get the results, the reporting scientists will interpret the levels and provide a conclusion, an interpretation and conclusion in the report for you. So we have on-site toxicologists that analyse the samples and report the results. There's 2 methods that we report the results. You may have a certificate of analysis, which will detail the analytical result that has been obtained, but will not have any interpretation. And then there's a statement of witness, which will have the chain of custody details, any information pertaining to the sample, and then the results and interpretation. It's an independent, impartial interpretation of the analytical results in the case. They should be easy to understand, clear and concise, and shouldn't baffle you with too much science. We work within the framework of family law and follow Part 25 of the Family Procedure Rules. So this is an example of the first page of a report The first thing you see there is a summary. So what we have here, there's no interpretation here, it's an overall conclusion. So we have the hair alcohol biomarkers, and also in this case, the blood alcohol biomarkers. So from the conclusion in this case, the results are not suggestive of chronic excessive alcohol consumption, and then it will give you the time period covered by the hair. And then also the individual blood markers, what they mean. With PEth, as that's a direct marker of alcohol and is within the blood, we can give a range. So that will either be abstinence or low alcohol consumption, social moderate alcohol consumption, or excessive alcohol consumption. There's the 3 different concentration ranges. And then if the non-direct biomarkers have also been tested, so which in this case is CDT, LFT and MCV, we say whether they're in the normal ranges or elevated. So then we've got the donor and sample information. So this is everything that you will need for the date of the collection, when we receive them at the lab, the collector's name and whether or not they're a AlphaBiolabs collector, the chain of custody. With any results that you get, the chain of custody will always be intact and complete, because we wouldn't test the sample if it wasn't. And then also the donor identification. So we take a photograph of the donor at the time of the sample collection, and that's placed at the rear of the report so that you can see who provided the sample on the day of the collection. And then also, if they provide photographic identification, if they have it, we will say the type, so either a passport or driving license, and then the reference number of that document, and whether or not it's expired. If it's a driving license, if it's provisional or a full driving license, that is normally detailed in that area for sample donor identification. So then we move on to the request. So we detail it out. So if scalp hair is requested and scalp hair is tested, if there's a case where there's no scalp hair available, we'll tell you the body type of hair that was collected, and then the information below that could change. So in this case, 3-month overview analysis for the alcohol markers was requested and undertaken. The blood analysis requested and was undertaken. If there's any deviations from those requests, it's normally underneath. So if, say, the body hair was collected, we can't test for ethyl palmitating body hair, but we do test for ethyl glucuronide, and it would be a different time period just due to the innate biology of body hair and how it differs from scalp hair growth and the hair growth cycle. So after the request, we then go on to the sample donor disclosures. So this can be important with alcohol, specifically what the donors declared. In this case, they consume alcohol once a month and what that level of consumption is. Sometimes we get units of measurement, sometimes we just get the generalized a glass or a bottle, and so that will just be stated, and we try to get as close to the statement that the donor gives at the time of the collection. And then any medications, and the medications will be separated out. So if there's say a cough syrup which contains ethanol, alcohol, we will separate that out, because although an individual may be consuming ethanol in these medications, they don't normally will lead to a positive result in hair testing for chronic excessive use, because obviously it needs to be 60 grams of ethanol a day, regular consumption or more. So we talk about whether or not the medications will affect them. So because ethanol is in some medications, it could contribute minimally. So we would never say they can't account for the hair biomarkers, but they may account for a tiny amount, but they would not push a social drink into the excessive range. So then, very importantly with hair alcohol markers, any treatments that are declared, because hair treatments can affect how the alcohol markers, how they're concentrated in the hair. So if hair dye is used, or even bleach, that can reduce the hair alcohol markers significantly in the case of bleach, because it damages the hair shafts. And between the two markers, ethyl glucuronide is water soluble, so even excessive shampooing can actually have an effect on how long it stays in the hair. Because it's water soluble, it would gradually decrease over time. And then any hair products that are used. So with hairsprays and gels and things like that, they may have ethanol in them as part of their for solubility of some of the products that are in there. So if they've been used, we will declare those as well. And then beneath that, you'll see the extraction process. we look at the washers and look for any evidence of dye, because although somebody may not use dye, if they have used it, it will be demonstrated there. So after this, we then go on to the test and the results. So in this case, 3 centimeters of hair, the ethyl glucuronide result is negative and the ethyl palmitate is positive. So then we go on to the next page and we will, sorry, just go forward. Thank you. And then the blood alcohol markers. So in this case, it details whether in the liver function tests in the normal range, if any of those are elevated, it will be distinguished, which range the CDT level is in, the MCV, if it's normal or elevated, and then most importantly, the PEth test result, what range the alcohol marker actually falls in. And so in this case, it's a social moderate alcohol consumption range. This case, we've got a nail sample. So although there's no international guidelines at the moment, if there's no body hair or head hair available, we can test fingernails or toenails for ethyl glucuronide. And it is turning out to be a very useful alternative when there's no other sample type available. So in this case, fingernails was requested, and it was requested for 6 months. And that's because the nail growth rate is different on fingers and toes. So on fingernails, they grow approximately 3 millimeters a month. Toenails grow on approximately 1.1 millimeters a month. So there's a much slower growth rate in toenails, hence why we give an overview time period of either 6 months or 12 months, just to give you a ballpark area of the kind of time frame that we're looking at. So in this case, with ethyl glucuronide in nail, we actually use a laboratory guideline for abstinence rather than chronic excessive cutoff, because at the moment there is no international standard. So in this case, we've detected ETG in the nail at a cutoff above the cutoff for abstinence. So we know alcohol has definitely been consumed within the growth rate of that nail. So reporting the results, we have the technical information, the alcohol analyses, and then the conclusions. So if in the conclusion, any evidence is taken, so if the hair has been dyed and the ethyl glucuronide result is below, and there's no hair products used, and the ethyl palmitate is above, then although the ethyl glucuronide is below, excessive alcohol consumption cannot be ruled out. So, and then we go to the disclosures for the report. The sample donor identification, that's where the photograph will be that was taken at the time of the sample collection. Then we have our qualifications and experience, the declarations, and then the peer review section. So the peer review section is quite important. That demonstrates that the interpretation and opinions and conclusions in the report have been verified by a secondary senior scientist. So you will never get an individual's opinion without it being validated by a second senior scientist. And then at the end of the report, there's the alcohol references, and that shows you where we get all of our information from that we base our interpretations on.
That's great. Thanks, Ashley and Marie, for the really useful insights. Okay, so we're moving on to the Q&A part of the webinar now. If you've not had a chance to ask a question yet, then please send that through now, and we'll do our best to answer it before we finish. Can I also just remind you as well that tomorrow we'll send you an email with a recording of the webinar, so you've got that to hand. We can also send out a copy of the slides as well if you want to request that to us. Okay, so we've had a few questions coming in, and I can see they're still coming in, so thank you for that. Okay, so first question for yourself, Marie. So just expanding on what you were talking about there. So the question says, hair strand alcohol testing appears to be increasingly adversely impacted by the use of numerous hair treatment products. So how useful and reliable a tool is this testing now? And is there a suitable alternative to it?
Okay, so with the hair alcohol markers, they've always been affected by hair treatments. Initially, when they started testing alcohol markers in hair, it was ethyl glucuronide alone. but then we'll be getting, in certain cases of hair dye or bleaching, false negative results. So that was then when the fatty acid ethyl esters were implemented to counteract any incidences of false negative results. The only issue we have with ethyl palmitate and the fatty acid ethyl esters is that they can be increased by ethanol containing products. So as a scientist, we put the weight on what we see in the hair. So if there's any indications of any dye or bleach or the application of any products, and then the weight of evidence actually goes against the marker that we think is the strongest in this case. So if a hair's been dyed or bleached, then we put more emphasis on the presence of the ethyl palmitate result. If the hair isn't dyed or bleached and the ethyl palmitate is positive but the ethyl glucuronide is negative, then the weight of evidence is more on the side of the ethyl glucuronide result, because there's nothing to suggest that it's been falsely decreased. In cases of constant cosmetic treatment, which is difficult to avoid, unfortunately, PEth testing is very good. It's a monthly test, and you can monitor the previous month's alcohol intake. So we'll know if somebody is within the range of abstinence, or whether they're drinking social moderate levels of alcohol, or whether or not they're drinking excessive. But because it only covers a month, it's more regular testing. So you can't do more historically than a month for their alcohol intake.
Great, thanks, Marie. Question now about collections, one for yourself, Ashley. So how invasive are the sample collections for blood?
Yeah, so unfortunately it's not a finger prick sample, it is a blood sample. For alcohol testing, depending on which one you opt for, the most we will take is 2 tubes of blood. If you do have a donor that is needle phobic, we have a few options. We can use smaller needles, smaller gauge needles, where possible, but it is an in vitro sample that we need. So unfortunately, that's our only option for this type of test at the moment. It can't be a finger prick test or anything like that. But yeah, unfortunately, it is a standard blood sample.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Marie, next question back to yourself. Why is the window detection different between toenails and fingernails?
The window of detection is based on the growth rate. Fingernails have a faster growth rate than toenails, so they're replaced much quicker. We say about 6 months, but it all depends on the length of the fingernail itself. Some people have quite short nail plates, some people have longer nail plates, and the longer a nail plate, the longer the time period it covers. So if you think of the different fingers, your little finger or your index finger, you'll have a different length of nail. So it's an approximate time period, but for nails, we say approximately 6 months because the growth rate is faster at approximately 3 millimeters a month. And then with toenails, because it's a slower growth rate, it's estimated that on a longer toenail, it could be replaced 12 to 18 months. So just due to that slower growth rate. So that's why we differentiate between the two and why they can't be combined as one sample. It has to be one or the other.
Great, thanks, Marie. Another question coming probably for yourself, Marie. What are the rules around cross-contamination and someone else having a sample taken at the same time?
The collectors are fully trained, and they will only take one sample at a time, complete the paperwork and seal it, and everything. The chain of custody is all sorted out at the time. So there's no way one hair sample from one individual will be swapped out for a sample from somebody else. And then when it comes into the laboratory, the submissions team will only open one sample at one time and deal with that sample, segment it, get it into its tubes, and then clear down the area, and then another sample will be opened after that. So there's never 2 samples, either from the collections point of view or in the laboratory, that are open at the same time.
It's fantastic, thanks very much. Okay, just conscious of time. There's another question here just for yourself, Ashley, with regard to collections. Do we offer sample collections at weekends or any time outside of 9 to 5 working hours?
Yeah, of course we do. We completely understand that between 9 and 5 isn't suitable for all donors. They might have other commitments or work themselves. So we can work around any requirements that you have. If you can let us know about it in advance, that's great. And if not, when we contact the donor, we can discuss those requirements with them and make alternative arrangements. The only time that we couldn't do them on the weekends is if they were looking to utilise our walk-in clinics. So they're open during the week on different days, but out of hours or weekend collections would be at the home address or your offices.
That's great. Thanks to both of you for that. And thanks to everyone that's put those questions in this morning. Okay, so we're just going to finish off now. So just to finish from myself, so why choose AlphaBiolabs if you've not used us before? Well, as Ashley explained, we can provide a sample collection from any UK address. We also offer free collections from any of our UK walk-in centres. Currently, for alcohol test results, we do issue the report within 7 working days from receipt of the sample into the lab. As Marie's taking you through, we do feel we have user-friendly reports, and you will get access to dedicated account and case managers. We, of course, are also fully accredited through UCAS, ISO 17025 and ISO 9001. We're also offering a special promotion until the end of June. So if you do require alcohol testing from us, then please quote the code ALC17 when you request a quote, and we will discount 17% from the alcohol testing fee. There's a number of ways you can do that. You can give us a call on 0333 600 1300 or email us at testing@alphabiolabs.com. But probably the best way to do it will be to go on our website, alphabiolabs.com, and you can request a quotation online. So that all really remains for me to say is thank you very much for your time this morning. We do appreciate your support with these webinars, and I hope that you found the last 45 minutes of interest to you. If you could kindly just spend a minute before you log off at the end of the webinar to complete the survey, that will give us some really good information for the future planning of these webinars. So please do get in touch. We are the experts in legal DNA, drug and alcohol testing. You can see our methods of contact on the screen there, including social media. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you're on there, please do give us a follow. And yeah, finally, it remains me to say thank you very much for your time again, and we look forward to seeing you on the next round of AlphaBiolabs webinars. Thanks very much and enjoy your afternoon. Goodbye.